Record. We are now recording. Welcome, everyone. So, hi, I am Heather Sedges. I am an assistant professor and human development specialist with UT Extension. And I'm really excited that there's 168 of you here today, 169. I love it. That's so great that we have some time to spend together sharing with you what we've been working on. So today we're going to be unpacking one of the Building Strong Brains grants that we've been working on for the past couple of years. And yes, this will be emailed out. I will probably share it to the Building Strong Brains listserv when it is fully uploaded and converted and all that sort of thing. So no worries on that front. But today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to use socio-emotional intelligence to address ACEs. So we hear a lot about adverse childhood experiences, the signs, the symptoms, what they are. And one of the things we're trying to do is really understand what we can do to help children deal with that. So our goals for today are just to introduce ourselves and the background of the grant that we've been working on and share with you some of our successes and lessons learned over the past couple of years. And when you see acronyms like SEL, that stands for socio-emotional learning, and OST stands for out of school time. So think of your aftercare programs. It's what we're talking about here. We're really excited to be sharing with you what we've learned and ideas that we have for implementing change in the future. We're also going to leave a little bit of time at the very end for questions that you might have. And as my colleague, Dr. Conrad, will be giving the presentation, I'll be observing the chat box and responding to you if and as needed. So we'll be handling that here in just a moment. So like I said, my name is Heather Sedges. I'm a professor with the University of Tennessee Extension, and UT Extension, if you are unfamiliar, is the outreach arm of the university. So we're a 100-plus-year-old institution, and our job is to translate research and best practices into real-life solutions for individuals. So the past 2 weeks, we've all been busy in our department working on coronavirus resources and outreach and education about how to stay happy and healthy at home. So, and I hope that's what you all are doing right now as well. My colleague, she works with us specifically on this grant. Her name is Dr. Katie Conrad, and she is our project coordinator for this grant. So she is really our guru, our out of school time SEL extraordinaire, and we're very, very lucky to have her as part of our team. So I referenced that this work that we're going to be talking to you about today, this came about through a partnership with the Building Strong Brains work and the grants that they've been putting out. And our overall objective really was just to break it down, to figure out what can we do to help children that are experiencing ACEs. And we dove into the literature, and really it's all about socio and emotional learning. And in order to increase students' resilience, we recognize that we're not, unfortunately, we're very unable to completely wipe out all of the ACEs that might be affecting children. That, of course, would be our dream. But the reality is that we can't do that. So instead, we want to give children and youth the power to be strong and resilient and be victors rather than victims of their situations and their experiences. So in order to do that, we have two important collaborations that make this possible. One is with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and the other is with, and you'll hear more about this later on, the other is with some out-of-school time settings. So these are after-school programs that are funded through a variety of different means, but they're all here in rural counties in Tennessee. So these are after-school programs that are funded either from federal or state-based grants, and my colleague, Dr. Devereaux, who works in our department, is the project investigator for that and oversees all of those. So we worked closely with him to gain access to those after-school programs, and then we partnered with Yale to pioneer what's called the Ruler approach. And Ruler is an acronym, as you can see here on the screen, and it stands for recognizing emotions, understanding those emotions, labeling them, expressing them, and then being able to regulate those emotions effectively. And what's important about Ruler is that it is an approach. It essentially is a culture change, is what we're trying to implement. We really want schools and out of school time settings to start to shift from that what happened to you to the other way of thinking, instead of what's wrong with you to what happened to you, so that we can really start to build the resilience of youth. We want to start changing that narrative for youth. So we started out with this initiative, with this approach, Ruler, and we are very lucky to have worked with Yale in doing this. Until we came along, they had only implemented the Ruler approach in school settings. So we were the first ones that said, hey, can we try this in after school settings and in rural communities at that? And they were very eager to work with us. And you'll hear more about our future and continuing work with them. But I'm going to turn it over right now to Dr. Conrad, who's going to dive into what exactly we've been doing with this work. Dr. Conrad?
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Sedges. I am going to take over from here, but I'm going to share from my view so I can transition to the slides myself. So just give me a hang tight for a second. All right, and I actually want to leave off at the end here. So going back to our project with Yale University and their Center for Emotional Intelligence, I wanted to highlight this last piece on this last bullet on this slide is that we are piloting, we are one of 3 pilot sites for this, for out of school time rularized programming. So Ruler is evidence-based and it has been found effective in the regular school day settings. And there is plenty of data and research that has been published on this. And so one of the main questions when we started our collaboration with Yale is, does this work for after school settings? And if not, what are some of the challenges that might exist in these settings and how can we fix those? And so this project has really evolved over the last 3 years that we've had the grant, because we've noticed some of the uniqueness and nuances of piloting this program for an out-of-school time audience. And so we are one of 3 sites that is piloting and rularizing out-of-school time content. So we represent the Southeast, there's one in Oklahoma, and then there's one in New York City. There we go. So I'd like to back up a little bit for those who may be less familiar of just a basic level, what is social and emotional learning, SEL, and I'll be using the acronym from here on. And what SEL is really kind of those soft skills that correspond to academics. It's the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So these are the skills that are not necessarily standardized in the classroom, like math or English language arts. Maybe these are the skills that are really necessary for life in general, for getting along with colleagues, being able to manage your time effectively to get tasks done, to build relationships with people, and also learning how to regulate your emotions in response to life stress and challenges. So there are 5 competencies that define social and emotional learning. The first of which is self-awareness. So this is understanding your own emotions, kind of if you were looking into a mirror and projecting what are those emotions and being able to name what those emotions are. So what are my thoughts and feelings? Self-management, these are the skills, attitudes, and behaviors that help you maintain those emotions and manage and regulate them. So things like mindfulness or taking a deep breath when you are stressed out. Just knowing exactly in the moment how to manage those emotions before reacting in a way that may not be healthy or optimal for the situation. So the third would be social awareness, the ability to take the perspective of different people and use empathy and compassion towards them. This is how children learn, that there are different perspectives and people are diverse, and how can we change our emotions and the way that we behave in conjunction with people who are different and think differently. So how can I better understand why people think and feel the way they do? Also relationship skills. So of course, this is pretty well known, the tools for establishing and maintaining healthy and rewarding relationships. And then finally, this is probably part of SEL that we are most familiar with and we do see a lot in the classroom, and that's teaching responsible decision making. So weighing between options of what's right and wrong and making constructive choices about their behavior and social interactions. So how can I solve problems effectively? What are the consequences to poor decisions? So one of the reasons we focus specifically on social and emotional learning is because I see it from my standpoint is really ACEs are kind of the so what of what's going on with a child who may be dysregulated in the classroom, but we need action. So the ACEs provides kind of the so what, the education, the knowledge on it, it's not enough. We need to move from being trauma informed to trauma responsive. And so I really see social emotional learning as the intervention or the even prevention in context for helping children to gain the coping skills and the self-regulation skills to maintain a calmer affect in the classroom and interactions with other students and a positive classroom environment that's more suitable for learning. And Dr. Wallace is actually going to take over this. We're going to do a little activity that will involve you all writing in the chat. So take it away, Dr. Wallace.
Well, this story that's on the screen here is a familiar one to many of us. So as I'm reading this through to you, I want you to really think about children with whom you've worked and some of the ways that they express the trauma that's been in their life. So this is a story about 6-year-old Tyrone, and he was just the terror of his first grade class. He pinched, hit, and refused to obey the teacher. And they were really frustrated with him and were beginning to hold those suspension hearings. This is a first grader. But at home and church, he was very clingy to his mom and his sister, and he was waking up with nightmares and bedwetting. What people from the outside weren't realizing, perhaps, was that Tyrone had fled with his mother, brother, and sister from a father who was abusive. And for Tyrone, where there was lots of rules and uncertainty at times for him, where he was without his mother, it felt threatening. And so rather than being a place of refuge that he needed, it became a fertile ground for him to act out and externally express his fears and trauma. So Katie, do you mind to go to the next slide there? So my question for all of you then is, share with us, now we have 217 of you on this webinar, so I'll go through them as well as I can, but share, if you don't mind, some signs or symptoms like what we just shared, that their children are experiencing neglect or trauma at home. So what are some of those signs and symptoms that you've seen? I like how my screen is just absolutely exploding right now. This is fascinating. Okay, so we've got lots and lots and lots here. This is so good. I'm going to see here if I can pull this out. And so what we're already starting, so some of the early comments are about children being withdrawn, socially withdrawn, emotional dysregulation, great term to use here. So this is the inability to come back down after being upset, not looking someone in the eyes. That might be cultural too. They might be children who are easily angered, regressing in schoolwork, unprovoked aggression, um, not being able to self-soothe. So these are all these emotional regulation behaviors, aggressive behavior, very clinging, the bedwetting, refusal to do any work or refusal to listen. Yeah, that non-compliance that I see there, reluctance to try new things. Here's one, stomach aches. The physical manifestation of stress and trauma is quite real. They could be having upset stomachs, headaches, acid reflux, those sorts of physical, crying for hours without the ability to be comforted again. The zoning out, that's a really interesting one that I want to mention, because a lot of times we think about children that are expressing outwardly and going, when sometimes trauma and the processing thereof looks like zoning out or dissociating or completely removing oneself from the situation emotionally. Um, Let me see here, not participating, um, needing adult attention all of the time. That could be one. Um, Sleeping in class, that certainly. Parentification, that's a really interesting one. So parentification meaning when the child is acting as the parent for others in their environment or for themselves to take care of themselves. And this typically happens in neglect scenarios where children aren't receiving the direct care that they really should be as children. So Katie, that we had a lot of really great responses there. And overall, I think the responses they really highlight for us how there's such a variety of ways that children express trauma or their experiences with neglect at home. And that we have to be aware that no two children really express trauma in the same way, quite honestly. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Conrad.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. These were excellent responses. And a lot of what I heard was, some of the internalizing types of symptoms. So these are withdrawing in the classroom, and often those kiddos get missed because they just are quiet, kind of more intuitive and focusing in the moment, but there's a lot going on, and this will contribute later to higher rates of depression, anxiety, and poor coping that may be unseen. And I also heard a lot of externalizing behaviors, some of those poor coping behaviors, poor lashing out, temper tantrums, and even some of the bedwetting and other physical manifestations of trauma that can turn into later some externalizing problems such as substance abuse and so on. And so really what the premise for us here is social emotional learning helps children to better regulate these types of emotions. And here's how. You all certainly know about brain science. I mean, you all are experts on this, so I won't spend a lot of time going into this. But when we especially are teaching brain science to young kids, we use the terms wizard versus over lizard brain. This is actually borrowed from a wonderful social emotional learning curriculum called BrainWise that was made out of the University of Colorado. And so lizard brain is our reptilian brain, brainstem, amygdala, our fight or flight center, versus our wizard brain is our prefrontal cortex or neocortex, that's responsible for logic and analysis and regulating those emotions. And so when a child is experiencing trauma, they flip their lid and are using more so their lizard brain. And social emotional learning somewhat brings the wizard brain on board by teaching children better coping skills and even to take strategies to help them calm down or pay attention in the moment to what's going on instead of reacting. So social emotional learning integration really is effective on rewiring the brain that's been affected by trauma. And research also supports the impact of social emotional learning. There has been large studies. What I'm reporting here is from two very large meta-analyses that include over 270,000 K through 12 students, and they were looking at programs that include social emotional learning versus those that don't, and academic, behavioral, and social outcomes. I just want to report some of the unique findings. So for those programs that incorporated a social and emotional learning program, and again, these are those programs that include self-awareness strategies, self-management, they focus on social awareness and building relationship skills and responsible decision-making. So they found that there was an increase of 9% in pro-social or helping behaviors. There was a 9% increase in positive attitudes about themselves and about the school climate. There was a 10% reduction in emotional distress and dysregulation. Also a 9% decrease in problematic behaviors. This is probably the most profound finding over the study. And again, when it was done in 2011, which is the Durlach et al. Article down at the bottom, it was only 11%. They did a follow-up, looked at it again in 2017, and it had increased to 13%. That programs that incorporated social and emotional learning increased standardized test scores by 13%. And it's because if you are more calm and connected in the classroom and regulated, you are better able to achieve in the classroom. You're paying attention more, you are learning more, you're remembering things, and you do better on your exams. There was decreases in teacher and staff burnout. So if there are more happy kids in the classroom, happy teachers, right? There was an increase in attendance rates and then long-term graduation rates. And there was also this last study here, Belfield et al. Looked at life potential and put social emotional learning into dollars. So for every dollar spent, nope, I always say this backwards, for every $11 invested, I'm saying it backwards again, brings a return of for every dollars invested in social emotional learning brings a return of $11 to the economy, because students who are more likely to graduate, get successful jobs, start careers, graduate from college if that's their track, and contribute to the economy. So now I can get into our specific project. We've had this grant for about 3 years. And so I would like to next transition to going over some of the project activities, lessons learned, and some of the future directions that we have. So in year one, this was back in 2017 and 2018, we built a partnership with Yale University's Center for Emotional Intelligence after we learned about their evidence-based ruler program that has been affected in the regular school day. We had Yale come down, they trained 5 of our before and after school program site directors in November of 2017. And as Dr. Sedges mentioned earlier, these programs are all across Tennessee, and they're funded by a variety of sources, LEAPs for our state grants in 21st century. And so these programs, approximately at the time that we are looking at, 5 programs, approximately 300 students were being served free of cost after school programming. So staff were trained on ACEs, so the Building Strong Brains curriculum, and then they also were trained specifically on the ruler approach and social emotional learning, and learned the strategies and the tools to integrate in the after school classroom. And then we also prepared for data collection, and we decided to use the DESA Mini, the Devereaux Strengths Assessment, and it is a common social emotional learning measure and system that a lot of sites are using to look at social emotional learning across their students. In year 2, was really a big year for data collection, and this was when we spent our time rolling out Ruler at our veteran sites, so our sites that had been trained. So if you can see here to the right, this image over baseline data and follow-up data, we noticed some really interesting findings. At baseline data, we see that only 12% of students were indicated being of need of social emotional learning, whereas at the end we found, after implementing the social emotional learning program, we found that there was a 7% increase of need at the end of spring of 2019, which was, you know, at first a startling finding. Why are they increasing their need in response to the integration of a social emotional learning program? And really what we found out was actually it was indicative of our staff development and maybe a gap in their understanding and view of social emotional learning. So we noticed that as staff bought into social emotional learning, they started to really understand social emotional learning and how to see it in the classroom, how to integrate it, what kinds of activities, what kinds of conversations that they could have with students to increase their emotional understanding and regulation skills. And so at the end, they were probably better attuned to notice nuances in students' social emotional learning skills.
Katie, I'm going to pause you here for a second.
Sure.
Can you provide us a definition of need? When you say that they had need, can you clarify for us what you mean by that?
Yes, absolutely. So these were teacher reports on students in the after-school classroom. So our teachers received received surveys on each of the students, and the surveys were based on those 5 competencies that I mentioned at the beginning of the social emotional learning part of the presentation. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And then there were 2 additional factors that they looked at. One was optimistic thinking, and the other one is escaping me right now. But these were basically saying, to what extent do students exhibit these particular skills in the after-school classroom? And so for those students overall that kind of had lower achievement in these areas, they would have been indicated in the need. So does that answer your question?
I think you answered it. Well, so yeah, that answers the question for now. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And so, again, as I said, the takeaway, we really noticed some nuances in staff's understanding of social emotional learning. And at the same time, Yale University, as we were reporting back to them, and they were looking at other after-school sites in different areas that they were piloting rularized after-school content, they were noticing some of the same kind of takeaways. And so they decided, hey, we need to kind of pull back and spend a little bit more time on making some out-of-school time social emotional learning professional development opportunities for staff before really this is going to have a sizable impact on students. And that's really kind of what we focused on in year 3. Oh, I forgot that I put this in here. I wanted to share with you some photos of what our after-school sites did related to each of the Ruler tools. So there are 4 anchor tools involved with Ruler, the social emotional learning approach that we integrated. The first is the Emotional Intelligence Charter. So this is a co-constructed, agreed upon mission statement that frames how students want to feel at school and what strategies they'll take to feel that way. So on the left here, we asked them to get very creative. So the students would create their own charter, as you can see here on the left, the pirate ship student charter. And then staff also create a charter as well of how they want to feel as a staff and what strategies they'll do to maintain that type of climate with students, because students are working in tandem with staff, and if staff don't really have a cohesive network with one another, or cohesive collaboration, students see that, they observe that, and it really impacts them as well. So this is a way to create an emotional climate that's suitable for everyone. The second tool was the mood meter, and these were really the only tools that we incorporated, because the other two are still being worked out for out of school time settings. But this is a meter that you use your math skills and you chart certain types of emotions. So in the yellow here, these would be really positive emotions. And if you think of the X and Y axis, this first quadrant here in the yellow would be your positive emotions, something that is very high pleasantness and involves a lot of energy. What kinds of things can you think of that are super positive emotions that involve a lot of energy? Things like ecstatic, happy, and so on. And then it goes around the mood meter. There's actually a mood meter app you can download related to this, but I won't go specifically into these tools for time's sake. But this to the right is an activity that they designed around the mood meter. Here was another a photo from one of our after-school sites. This was a middle school after-school site, and for those of you who serve a younger audience, you'll recognize these Komochis. Komochi stands for feelings, and they use the Komochis for a journal entry. So the students received a social emotional learning journal that they would regularly write or doodle or draw in related to social emotional learning. So they'd pick a Komochi, and then they'd write about a time they may have felt that emotion. And it's really, again, teaching that self-awareness, what are some of these emotions that I'm feeling, and how did I manage them in the moment? And then some of our sites even tried out as a self-management strategy, yoga and mindfulness, and they really loved it. And we had a wonderful site director who was very well-versed. She was a certified yoga teacher and did mindfulness all the time. And so she did integrated yoga as part of the programs. And we've even had sites that it's surprising how engaged they are with mindfulness, and even had a group of 8th grade boys that came in after school and said, hey, can we do some mindfulness? We're just so pent up after being at school all day that we just really need some time to relax. And so they really engaged with mindfulness as a strategy to kind of bring them back into a state ready to learn and pay attention and engage in a fashion. All right, so year 3, this was our last year, 19 and 20. This is when we decided that we really, in conjunction with Yale University, that we wanted to focus and refocus on staff development. And we understood that there was variability across all of our sites related to their buy-in to social emotional learning. At the same time, at the state level, there was a law that came out that said that all public schools needed to be ACEs trained or trauma informed. And so that's when we decided this movement is may have been a little bit ahead of the curve, but now everybody's really getting into and understanding the value and the point of ACEs, which is all thanks to pretty much everyone on this call for all of the wonderful work that they do in training on the Building Strong Brains movement. And so with that, we learned that people started to really understand and get social emotional learning works. We just don't know where to start moving forward. And so we focused our staff development efforts by first hosting joint focus groups at all of our sites across the state. And these are findings that Yale generated themselves and shared with us. And there were 7 main findings. I only included a few here. And so one of the things that they noticed that across all of the sites that they're piloting the rularized program, after school programs, is that trauma and mental health is just a constant part of out of school time work. It's always there. I mean, it tends to target students who are at risk and living in poverty. And so that's something that there really needs to be a greater focus on. Staff also recognize the importance of their own social and emotional learning and well-being. That's kind of where we are with our staff, is that they see that social emotional learning is important, but some of their own social and emotional needs are not being met, either at home or in school or in life. And so really kind of focusing on their own well-being is integral in rolling out social and emotional learning to students. And staff want to learn ways to support student social and emotional development. They just, again, don't have the tools, don't have the time, or can't afford the tools to provide this in class. The culture of staff relations was something that was talked about at nearly all of our sites, that it kind of makes it or breaks it. If staff are really, if they're friends, if they really get along and they just have a really great flow with one another, it is really wonderful and suitable for social emotional learning. But we know that not all places are set up like that. And sometimes there are staff relationships that can derail the operations of an out of school time program. And so really focusing on not just the self-care of our staff, but this relationships that they have with one another is really integral to social emotional learning being effective with kids. And finally, and this goes across, I think, even outside of the context of social emotional learning programming, is that trainings need to be engaging. They need to be relatable. You know, especially with any sort of teaching audience or an audience that serves teachers, you all want tools, you want things that you can grab and go that are grab and go that you can take with you and provide to in your programming. So teachers especially, they want strategies and tools that they can use. So with kind of all this taken together, our last year has been related to the creation of these grab and go social emotional learning tools. So we are creating a card deck for easy, ready to roll social emotional learning cards that are based on, again, those 5 competencies I mentioned of social emotional learning, and it's called iCare Integrated Classroom Activities for Regulating Emotions. And the intention is, once they are piloted and tested, we would love to provide them out to schools and after school programs for them to have an easy social emotional learning activity, you know, to handle transitions, for instance, coming in from recess or coming back from lunch. Or if, and these are both up and down regulation type strategies for students who may be kind of bored and out of their mind, not really with it at the moment. So upregulation strategies would bring them back and, you know, ready to focus, versus down regulation strategies are for those students who are hyped up and really excited, or maybe really angered or dysregulated at the moment, and kind of bring them down in a state that's ready to learn. Finally, some of the lessons learned, and I've already kind of alluded to some of these, that staff development is really where we need to begin in order for social emotional learning programming to be effective. There is a lot of skepticism we've learned across many of our sites regarding social emotional learning. Actually, it's kind of a spectrum. There's many sites that they buy into it and they totally see the connection of social emotional learning and how it can help their students. And then there's others that say, hey, we don't really talk about emotions in the classroom. That's something for parents to talk about with their kids. That's not really suitable here. And so we really need to address that skepticism and figure out ways to help sites buy into the information. And one of the ways to do that would be readiness to implement assessments. So providing some sort of a social emotional learning assessment at your site to see if the culture is even suitable for rolling out a social emotional learning program. Again, staff relationships are important. And when all this is in place, this will make a supportive social and emotional learning culture that students will really start to engage with the material in meaningful ways. Also, affordable access to social emotional learning curricula and resources is integral to the success of a program. And a lot of teachers have commented on the fact that social emotional learning, unlike math, science, English language arts, it's just not standardized in terms of TN Ready. And a lot of these resources can be hard to find. You might find an activity here and there, but as far as an affordable, ready to roll program, there you really have to do some digging, and teachers just don't have the time for that. And so providing that for teachers is really important. We don't want to see social emotional learning as another thing to add to their already very full plate. They want it easy, and it needs to be affordable. So some of the future directions, and I only have a few more minutes, but future directions: rigorous staff development, and this is really what Yale's role is. They started with focus groups across the state to kind of get an idea of what staff are feeling related to social emotional learning. In the next few years, they are developing out of school time specific resources. So these are professional development trainings, videos, fact sheets, all sorts of things that will help new staff especially. And related to out of school time settings, there's a lot of staff turnover. There's a lot of students that don't come every day. There's a lot of students that only come in the fall, for instance, instead of the spring. And so these are some of the nuances in out of school time programming that you don't see in the regular school day. And so we need some resources that kind of address some of those needs. And again, creation of affordable social emotional learning resources. We are still in development of these iCare cards. We need to test them and then edit them and send them out. And so hopefully by then they will also have some sort of a standardization process, kind of like math and English language arts. And then our next step we really would love to focus on staff social emotional learning and self-care, since that seems to be a big gap with staff. Is you can only do so much for students in teaching them social emotional learning skills if you feel like your social emotional needs are not being met. And so how can we help staff in regular school day and out of school time programming feel more connected? And I wanted, if we had time, and we don't, but I would love to highlight, and when we send out these slides, feel free to check out this video. For those who are unfamiliar, there's an elementary school in Nashville who has integrated this wonderful social emotional learning program, cultural change. And one of the features of it that I really love is this tap in, tap out. And it is the ability for teachers, when they are feeling overwhelmed, or maybe they need to take a phone call, or they just need a break for whatever reason that might be, they can use a tap in, tap out, and have another staff member from somewhere in the school come in and take over for the time being. And it's just a really supportive way to give staff time to take care of whatever those needs are that they have in the moment, and not feel like I have to, put this aside until the end of the day or whenever I have a moment. All right, and I'm going to end right here and see what questions you all have. I'm hoping Dr. Sedgwick has been paying attention to the chat, and I would love to open it up for whatever questions you have.
I have been paying attention to the chat, Katie, and I really appreciate all the points, and people have really been paying attention and engaging in the content. So I'm so grateful for everyone's attention. Did a great job explaining what we've been working on the past couple of years. So I want to, there's one question here that from Ryan Hunter. It says, after school activities are amazing. However, I think the main target audience for programs are students that rely on transportation by buses or other avenues transportation that will not coincide with after school time frame. Okay, so that is another group of youth. What if you could incorporate SEL content during lunch hours so students and staff be refreshed for after lunch learning? So that's a really great question, Ryan. And I think what we're hoping to do is pilot this work that we're working on now, and hoping that it kind of trickles up, if you will, into the school day. And trickles out into things like transportation and that sort of thing. So because Ruler affords it to be, it's an approach, not a program, we can start to see cultural change when things are translated into settings that we didn't originally intend for them to be used in. So things like lunchtime or bus rides, you know, part of what a challenge is making sure that you have the staff and the capacity in those settings that can help lead children through the exercises and that would be some more supportive to their socio-emotional learning, because some of these activities really do take guidance to really unpack emotions that youth are having and that sort of thing. So, you know, we don't want to distract bus drivers. So could we have a peer coach? Could we have a volunteer parent who's trained in a certain technique ride with the children and really engage them on the school bus? What about volunteers in the lunchroom? Because asking teachers to do one more thing during lunchtime might be a bit much. So really ensuring that schools and those venues have capacity that are highly trained to guide students will be really important in extending some of this work into those settings. Let's see. Yeah, you know, one of the, a couple of people have been mentioning both privately and publicly on the chat about the staff development piece here. And so I want to touch on that. There are a number of barriers, quite frankly, with staff development. One is we could stand there and we talk to a blue in the face about the hows, how do you do this? Why should you do this? But it's really important, and we've learned this, that we start to help the teachers themselves and the after school counselors address their own trauma and address their own issues. And that's sometimes a boundary issue in the workplace, right? So we have to make sure we have the resources for them. One of the most beautiful things, though, about educating individuals about adverse childhood experiences, as I'm sure you all have experienced this, is when you start to explain it to people, they kind of like start to wander off in their mind for a moment, and then they have this aha moment, like, that's why I am the way I am, or that starts to explain some of the ways I react to certain things. So we really believe that through education, we're able to support our staff, but we are also encouraging staff to rely on one another in boundary appropriate ways and facilitating that growth. We know that when we're healthy individuals and we bring a healthy mindset, that it benefits the students as well. So staff development, it's a lot of teaching the how, but it's also encouraging individuals to heal themselves and to start to do that work and start to understand how what they're bringing to the table affects how they interact with the individuals in that setting as well. Katie, do you have anything to add here?
I don't, but I think you answered it fully.
Thank you. The other point that I wanted to make here is that can be challenging in situations like out of school time where we see a fair amount of turnover for staff. So emotional healing and recognizing trauma and responding to it can take time, right? And so to invest in that supportive mechanism really takes someone saying, I'm going to be here not in the short term, but for the long term, and to help unpack that. So turnover rates can tend to be detrimental to addressing that at times, unfortunately. When will there be more resources available to share with faculty and staff? So the iCare project is something we're currently creating, like literally we are putting lessons into formats and getting everything worked up. We're hoping to get, so it's going to be really expensive to print out everything that we have as part of that iCare work. What we're hoping to do is create a comprehensive interactive PDF that can be shared widely and used. So we need to, so because we are extension, we don't release anything until we have fully tested it and ensure that it is highly effective. We only do things in research and evidence-based manners. So in order to do that, we need to slow down our timeline, and that can be frustrating at times. So what our plan is to create these cards. Our plan was to start to pilot some of the exercises this school year, but unfortunately school is basically out for the rest of the school year. And if it's not out the entire school year, when we go back, introducing something new like this is going to be a big no-go for a lot of schools just because of the virus situation. So our best approach now is to start again next August, when schools start coming back and we have our after-school settings back with us. So we'll be testing those out, gathering data. There were a couple of people that messaged me and were interested in supporting our pilot project for this. And if that's you and you are interested in gaining early access, but knowing that they might need to be tweaked in the long run, then shoot me an email either at the email listed here below or at hsedges@utk.edu. The emails will all come to me, and we can add your name to a list. And when those resources become available, reach out to you. So the caveat with piloting is that we do request feedback. So it's not, so it comes with a little asterisk. You can have it, but you got to tell us how it works. So if you're interested, just let me know. We're happy to get that out to you. Let me see down here. How present, so this is another question. How present has your work been in Western Tennessee? Katie, I'm going to let you field this question.
Sure. I actually had a slide that starred each of the counties, and I don't think I mentioned this, so great question. We actually haven't gone too out west aside from Hickman County. And again, all of the sites that we were testing ruler at were sites that we have grants for from the Department of Education, state and federal funds. So Hickman County is pretty much the only Western site, but we have 4 sites in Hickman County, and Hickman County is a very large county. We have a new site starting in Shelby County in the fall, and we plan to roll out ruler there as well. It's at a charter school. So we're slowly getting out west. It's just we're here in Knoxville, and we just we have a lot more sites in the eastern and central region.
Great response. Thank you. So another question that's being asked here, or another comment, let me pop all the way, you all, this is a lot of questions to feel through. So let's see here. It says that kids in after school programs might be at an advantage by being in a financially stable home. So I just want to back up on one defining characteristic. All of our after school programs that we were working in were actually all in Title IX schools, and the youth that were participating in those after school programs were recruited because they were considered at increased risk, or and they were SNAP recipients or other qualifying means. So the groups that we have tended to not be in highly financially stable situations. Is that correct, Katie?
Sort of. I will say that, so all of these sites are free of cost to the students. So they tend to solicit more at-risk students, but we are required by our grantors to provide equitable opportunities. So it's not just at-risk students that join our programs, you know, at risk for failing or at risk in that sense. We just happen to have a lot of students who have higher impoverished backgrounds, so that could put them at potential risk. But as far as the after school programs that are for cost that parents have to pay for, I would certainly say that those would be at an advantage and may change the results of the research that we did. Wonderful. So you were, yes.
Anne. So another question, was the youth participation voluntary or mandatory due to state funds, and how did we overcome resistance from youth? That's for you,
That's
Kate.
a really great question. And so the participation in Ruler, it was just kind of, it was integrated in the program without, students kind of come on a voluntary basis. If they want to be there, they'll come on those days. If they don't want to be there, they don't come. Or if they can't come, or they might come in the fall and the spring. And so in a sense, it was voluntary that if they were doing Ruler days and they would know the schedule in advance, they just may not come to those days. We didn't see a lot of resistance, except for there seems to be something about, and this is not surprising, but there seems to be something about 8th grade boys and talking about emotions. And so I would say probably more so at a developmental level. We see a lot more pushback in middle schools. And so that's something that we are working to overcome. And I think it's, journaling could be, for instance, some more self-reflection and tools that you can use that privatize the responses they have in relation to their emotions. So coming in the room and saying how you're feeling out loud in front of the group using the mood meter was not effective for middle school, but picking a Komochi and writing a reflection piece in a journal seemed to be make them feel a little bit less vulnerable, and we had a lot more success. So, and I really rely on our teachers who know their kids really well, and they come up with really great strategies to get around some of the resistance that we see.
That's spectacular. I'm going to share my screen just for a second to respond to one of the other questions here. So one of the questions was, could this be used, and I'm kind of answering a couple of different comments and questions with this one answer. So could this be used in after school settings? In childcare and family home care settings? What about just doing yoga and mindfulness? That could really go a long way. So I'm going to share, I'm going to put this link in the chat box here. And this is a 58-page guide that I just reviewed the other day, and I'm really endorsing it. It's a toolkit for early childhood organizations, and it's from 0 to 3, so we know it's a really great resource, but it's all about building a mindfulness and a mindful program and helping students create that space and time. So here you can see how it's sharing feelings. So this is very similar to a lot of the work that Ruler's doing. And one thing I really want to stress here is that Ruler is one approach. It's been tested in elementary school settings. Now we're testing it in out of school time settings. But for the early childhood care settings, it's important to look to resources like this that really understand the importance of child development as well as the setting piece itself. So let me share this link in the chat box. I'm going to see if I can get back to that chat box. I'm going to have to stop sharing. Here we go. See if I can work all of this. And I know we've got 1 minute left here. So there's that link, and this toolkit is so there's a link for it, but it's also on 0to3.com. So I'm going to put 0to3.com is where it's from. So that's a great toolkit to be used there. If you would like to, so here's what we're kind of dealing with a little bit. A lot of you are wanting to be involved. How can we get more information about Ruler? How can we use this in our schools? We're a trauma-informed school. So right now running this grant, it's me and Katie. Okay, let me correct that. It's Katie. And she's doing an amazingly wonderful job. We don't have the capacity right this second to be able to go out and train every single one of you. However, we do have lots of resources to share. So I think what we would be very happy to do, and Katie, if I'm misspeaking, please let me know. We're really happy to put together a Google Drive of resources for you to go in there peruse on your own. You were always more than welcome to reach out to either of us, and we would be happy to support you and your exploration using those tools. We've collected a lot of resources as we've tried to build a really strong programs. So Katie, what do you say? Should we fill up a Google Drive and send it out when we post all of this with our webinar recording?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a great idea. And I will say, if you want to look into, outside of Ruler, if you want to look into another curriculum, we actually, our extension agents are trained in a social emotional learning curriculum that they could bring to your schools. It's called, and I mentioned it earlier, Brainwise. And they have a K through 5 and a 6 through 12 version, and they even have a one-on-one version for using outside of schools. So not just school settings, counselor settings. They've even used it in prisons with inmates. And it's a wonderful, that's where that wizard over lizard brain, you know, teaching very young kids about brain science is really difficult. And they've been able to use language that's very relatable for them. And they understand, oh, I need to take a deep breath because I want to bring my wizard brain on board, so I'm not using my lizard brain. And so I would recommend that in the moment. The Brainwise curriculum, just I can provide you all the link. It is a for-cost curriculum, but again, a lot of our agents across the state have been trained in it and have access to the curriculum, and they can bring it to your county or your school. But yes, absolutely. The social emotional learning Google Drive for you all with lots of resources. I would love to set that up. We have a wealth of resources that we would want to share and get it to you all.
Absolutely.
Dr. Conrad, Dr. Sedges, thank you guys so much for this wonderful webinar. It was just really enriching and informative. And thank you for being willing to create that Google Drive. For those of you who are still on the line, we will be sending out the link to the recording of this as well as the resources that they're going to make available to us. But thank you again and have a lovely rest of your week. Stay safe, everyone.
And just a last point here. If you are working in the county, contact your UT extension agent and they can get in touch with us as well. They can provide some of these resources directly in your school settings as well. Thank you, Tracy Hackett. Thanks you all. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.